Our planet is a lonely speck in the great cosmic dark.
We're on a rock hurling through the universe. Planet as an organic spaceship.
Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand.
Hi, this is Chrissy.
And I'm Marie.
And you're listening to Alt.Pop.Repeat,
A show where we get into the nitty-gritty around counterculture, alternative culture, and sync it up with what?
with pop culture.
Yeah, man. That's what we do.
There we go.
Why is it not psychedelics? Why is it psychedelics?
I don't know. We got to look that up.
I mean, these are the pressing questions that need to get answered.
know.
This is not the intro, but it could be the intro, but it could be part of the intro. You know what? Let's do the rewind sound.
Okay, Marie.
Okay, I'm ready for
I'm going
this.
to ask you, and
Mhm.
we're gonna guess them
Ask
together.
me.
Well, I'm going to know because the article's in front of me, so I'm going to quiz you.
You're gonna know.
Well, let's see. Okay, what are the misconceptions of psychedelics?
So I'd say like the misconception is that if you do psychedelics, that you are going to have brain damage.
But that's right. Well
Do you
done.
like how that was
I'm gonna
like?
put the applaud sound in. Yay! History hands.
No, exactly. What can I tell you? Another one. Okay, so I would say like another misconception is like how it is used. That somehow this is like a super fun like party drug.
It's another one. Psychedelics are the ultimate party drug. Not true. But you're right. That's Sam. Agreed. So we segue. Who is our guest today?
Oh, I love this. Is fun. I feel like it's the Marie Hour. Well, Chrissy, let me tell you who our guest is. We're delighted. We are delighted to entertain the stories and the musings of one former NFL player by the name of Eben Britton.
Yes. Eben Britton, yes, as you said, is a former NFL player. He also has a show called The Ebb and Flow, where it dives into reality behind the veil of perception. And so he talks a lot about psychedelics and his own personal journey within spirituality. And then he talks with experts, athletes, and entertainers. And then he says he discovers more of a complete view of the world. So he was awesome. He was so cool and so chill.
So chill.
And now that I've been following him immensely on Instagram, I'm like, we love you.
We love you. We've already made a decision.
More chill. Yeah.
Eben, if you're listening to this right now, Chrissy and I are committed to interviewing again whenever we're in California when the world isn't burning around us.
Yep.
And just, just being in the moment. Let's talk about psychedelics.
We're going to go do some meditation with you and some yoga. And
We've
maybe
planned
some
it out.
peyote. Right.
Just so you know, we've already planned this out.
Yeah.
So
it's happening.
We're
Get ready.
looking forward to it. It's going to be great.
Get ready.
So we should probably go to the interview.
I say, and in the end, we sync it up. I'm also going to say before, get ready to tune in, and drop it. I had to say it. You've done a lot in your career, but how did you get into psychedelics and psilocybin? Like, what was that moment that made you become really interested in it?
It's an interesting question. My current psychedelic usage, maybe we'll get to that through me telling my story and my interest in it. I'm currently writing my book, The Ebb and Flow. And it's the tagline is basic tools to transform your life. And plant medicine is a big part. Plant medicine is one of the pillars of what I talk about, what has helped me reconfigure myself, be reborn in this new life after football. But that really, as I write about it, that really started when I was a kid. And it's sort of this inexplicable gravitation that I've felt for a long time. Sometime when I was 16 or 17 years old, I remember having this thought of being really interested, intrigued about doing a peyote ceremony out in the desert. And that might or might not have been inspired by this movie called Altered States. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, but it's an incredible movie with this guy, William Hurt. And he is a scientist at NYU doing all these studies with float tanks. He goes out to Mexico, has a life-changing experience with peyote, brings the medicine back home to New York and starts experimenting with taking peyote and going into the float tanks. And he goes through this whole de-evolution process and emerges out of the float tank every night as a more primal version of himself running the streets of New York City. And it ends kind of in a super intense way. You know, he sort of loses control of the transformation and gets caught between phases and, you know, realizes that that's maybe not something to be doing all the time. And not that psychedelics aren't something you should partake in frequently, because I definitely do. But it planted this seed of curiosity. As a teenager, I never really dabbled in psychedelics. I had a few very intense experiences with cannabis as well. I always had this intuitive curiosity about it. And something I've learned about myself in my bloodline, my family lineage, is that this mysticism, this gravitation towards the occult and the unseen realms of reality really goes way back in my family tree, all the way to my first American ancestor, this woman named Mary Bliss Parsons, who came to America in about 1635 and settled this town with her husband called Springfield, Massachusetts, where she was on trial for witchcraft 3 times, got off every time, was all of these stories and these feuds with the women of the town. They thought she was constantly seducing their husbands and would visit farms, and entire herds of cattle would drop dead and children would get sick and all sorts of things. And her husband had to lock her in the barn at night, and there'd be howling coming from there at 2-3 o'clock in the morning. And there's a number of books written about her, and it's been really fascinating. My grandmother only over the last couple of years turned me on to this, and it's given me a lot of context in my own understanding of myself, the things that I'm really interested in, the things that I'm called to, and plant medicine is really one of those things. So I guess this all began with a couple years after my retirement from the NFL. I was feeling incredibly disillusioned with my life, with myself, with whatever it was I was doing. I had founded a CBD company that wasn't really working out the way I had hoped. I was confronting this reality of being in business with partners who just were not aligned in my vision of what I was hoping to do and hoping to accomplish. And through cannabis advocacy, I met a lot of great people. I met this one guy, went to his office. He was a cannabis technology company, and he introduces me to the whole team. And there's this steely-eyed, Luciferian-looking dude in the corner with a baseball bat on his shoulder. And my buddy goes, "Hey, Eben, I'd like you to meet Kirk." And Kirk just kind of looks at me. And he's an Australian guy. And he goes, "You're a big motherfucker. I might have to use this baseball bat on you." And I was like, who is this guy? You know, and so anyway, we have a good laugh because I kind of dig that humor, that sort of masculine warrior humor from my old football days. I appreciated it. We went up to the conference room, we sit down, they're kind of explaining to me the business. And Kirk just is looking at me this whole time, and he goes, "Eben, you know you're a shaman." And I go, "What?" And it really hit me in the heart, because my whole life, this is really like my deepest soul's calling felt in vain with that term.
Wow.
And all the guys around the room are like, yeah, Kirk knows what he's talking about. You should listen to him. And Kirk says, let's go have a coffee one day. I want to give you a reading and I want to talk to you. And it turned out Kirk was like the corporate shaman for this company. He worked directly with the CEO to do what he called setting the river of energy with the company. So he employed all sorts of practices for everyone in the company. They had to meditate. They had to do breath work. He would organize ayahuasca ceremonies. I didn't know any of this at the time, but I was just sort of struck by this guy. And so we go and have coffee. He tells me my life story without even really saying anything to him. I'm in tears. I'm totally breaking down. And he goes, Eb, I'm organizing a combo ceremony next week with the guys from work. And every time I think about it, you come into my mind. I think it would really serve you. Now, combo, if you guys may or may not know, combo is a shamanic medicine from the Amazon. It comes from the green monkey frog.
I've heard of the green monkey frog before. I never knew it was named Combo.
Yeah, so combo or kapu, and they take the poison that this frog excretes, and a shaman will burn holes in you and then spackle this venom into the burns, and you have this really intense purging experience. And he's telling me this, and I'm like, I don't know, man. That sounds really intense. I don't know if I'm ready for that. And we finish coffee. We walk back to his car, and to just give you a sense of how this guy just he reminded me of the magic of life, because we get back to his car and he's got a business card tucked in his windshield, and he pulls it off and he goes, oh, fuck me. Look at that. And he turns, and it's a combo practitioner had placed this card on his windshield. And he said, I think it's calling you, mate. And I'm like, okay. So long story short, a lot of like internal things are happening for me in that. I'm telling my wife about it. She's like, I don't really feel good about you doing that. Do people die? What is this?
Right.
So
I'm scared too. It's totally valid.
yeah, of course.
Especially if she's not into that psychedelic side, or or maybe she is now, but she wasn't before. Yeah, it's
it's
exactly.
Just fun for me.
Green frog. Yeah,
it's just so fun for me to hear the story, because I'm like, oh, I know exactly what all of this is, because I've been on both sides of it. But like, please continue on. I'm so into your story right now. You don't even understand.
Amazing. I love that.
So you got the flyer.
Yeah. So we got the flyer. I'm in this. I'm in total inner turmoil, which is also part of the process, and we'll get more into that in a second. But I work it out with my wife. It's like the night before the ceremony, and I'm on the phone with Kirk, and he's like, Eb, are you confirmed? Are you going to come? And I'm like, I don't know, man. My wife really doesn't want me to. And he tells me the story about soldiers leaving home for war. And if the men decide to stay to appease their woman, their relationship will be fractured forever, because there's all of this resentment that's created, and a man sort of sacrificing his calling for a relationship. And I was like, okay, I guess I have to go. So I go to this house somewhere in Westwood in Los Angeles. And it's this beautiful home, kind of run down. Like there's an empty pool in the courtyard. This big majestic tree is like curling itself over. It's kind of cold. We walk into the house, and it's this like giant living room with 30-foot ceilings. And in the back, it's all white walls, but in the back is this woman sitting on a sort of altar surrounded by these angelic looking women wrapped in blankets. And this woman, the woman who's the shaman, her name is Karina, and she had this like, in my mind's eye, she had a headdress on, and I don't know if that's true or not, but the smell was intoxicating. It was just all of this environment was so surreal. And there's a handful of guys, and there's these placemats set, or where we could go and put down our yoga mat and our blanket. And we were told to bring all these things, bring 2 gallons of water, because you have to drink tons of water throughout the process. So we sit down. My first experience was every guy went up and got served hape. Now, hape is a very fine tobacco ash mixed with this uni plant from the Amazon that a shaman prepares, and they blow it up your nose, each nostril, through a animal horn of some sort. And
Intense.
it was super powerful. And hape is a super powerful medicine that's really, it's very grounding. It's very clearing. They use it in the Amazon or wherever it's taken to clear out energy blockages, to clear negative shit, electromagnetic funk, as it may be referred to at times. So it's very powerful, and it sets the tone for the ceremony. And you know, they use this in ayahuasca ceremonies and all sorts of things. I'm actually a really big fan of it. I use it a couple times a week. But it's very clearing emotionally, physically. It can be very intense if you've got a lot of gunk built up in you, emotional and physical. So it's very useful, especially before a ceremony. So I get served that. I'm kind of surrendering to this very new high that I've never felt. I feel very grounded. I feel very clear. I feel very ready. All of the anxiety that I had come into this ceremony with had dissipated, and I was really surrendering to this moment. So I'm drinking tons of water. One by one, we go up to get served combo, and they take a little stick. It looks like an incense stick, and she just burns these holes in your shoulder. It's really just, I say holes, but because it's circular, but they're really burning off just the first few layers of skin. There's all sorts of chemical processes involved where this is necessary to neutralize an aspect of the venom that would actually make you sick and could paralyze you. So you never want to take this medicine without doing it through this application method, which I think is really interesting. So I get served the combo. I go back to my seat. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this. Kirk is like, you have to do it 3 times in one moon cycle. So this
Obviously,
is just
Kirk.
one of 3, because that they call that the warrior cleanse. And this is what they'll do before going out on hunts in the Amazon to tap into a deeper sense of synchronicity with nature and the environment and all sorts of good stuff. So I go up, I get served the combo, I go back to my seat, and all of a sudden I just start to feel this. I feel the power of the forest moving through me. I feel like I have a frog like beating through my heart. And I can literally feel this medicine working through my body. It goes through my arm. I can feel it move into my heart. My heart is fucking pounding. My throat is hot. I'm getting super hot. I'm sweating. I'm drinking tons of water. And I feel this thing moving through all the old injuries that I sustained during my football career. It's moving into my right shoulder and moving things. It's moving down. I had my appendix removed because it ruptured my last year in the NFL, and I had to have an emergency appendectomy. I feel the medicine work in there and sit there for minutes, and it released something in that. And meanwhile, all of a sudden this nausea kicks in, and I just start vomiting everything I have inside of me. And it's like green and bile and all kinds of shit's just coming out. The other thing that I've always found really profound, I've done combo 4 times now. It's one of my favorite medicines. There's nothing psychedelic about it. As far as the visions, as far as the psychological experience, but it is a profound physical and emotional purging. And what I think is so interesting about every time I've done it, the first thing that happens is I break down into tears. And that I've always attributed just to this overwhelming gratitude of surrendering to this thing, surrendering to myself, having kind of gone through the gauntlet of inner turmoil, that I now realize everything is okay and everything's going to be okay. And so it lasts about 15 minutes. It's like the most intense flu you've ever had for 15 minutes. You literally clear everything out of your physical body. But I emerge so emotionally clear. Like I had never been so clear in my life. And that really was magnified over the next 2 ceremonies that I did. And so that really, this really deep relationship with plant medicine. And that's, not a plant medicine, but a biomedicine. But it's very much in family. And it, from there, I had done, leading up to that combo experience, I had done about 6 months of LSD, every day microdosing, which had been profound for me and opened me up in ways that I had never really imagined, released me from things. But the combo really sort of took this and galvanized my relationship with myself as this new person, who was really interested in my inner work and my life's purpose, which is, for me, to rectify my family lineage, to speak truth, and to empower others in their truth of self. And, that led me into ayahuasca, because the next thing, of course, was Kirk said, Eb, there's an ayahuasca ceremony next month. I think you should do it. And I'm like, okay, and that was a really profound experience of, coming home in many ways. Ayahuasca was, again, I was filled with that inner turmoil, which they say the medicine starts to work way before the ceremony, because you start to have all of these, especially with the dieta, where you're clearing yourself out of, all sorts of things. The dieta is super strict, and you're really forced to examine your relationship with everything, with food, with yourself, your relationships, how you move through the world. And so that first ayahuasca ceremony, again, I was released from fear and brought into this sense of, wow, my whole life really makes sense, and I'm meant to be here. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And this is something I've done for many, many lifetimes.
Well, and you're respecting the craft. Do you find that now that the Western culture is kind of appropriated, because it is a ritual? And when you're looking at psilocybin or LSD or any type of psychedelics, people are doing them recreationally and on for different reasons. Do you feel that it's getting appropriated because it's becoming mainstream?
Definitely. I think with groups like MAPS doing really profound scientific research to prove the legitimate application of psychedelics to treat everything from PTSD to, releasing people from all sorts of trauma, psychological and physical. People are beginning to, well, I guess, it starts with the plants, because I think they emerge because there's a deep intelligence there, that is causing them to emerge the way they are. And we're seeing all of this, psilocybin is being legalized in various states here in America, and decriminalized. And I think that's really the next phase as cannabis has moved into this somewhat completely legalized state, you know?
Yeah, because there's this whole fungi connection that they talk about in this inner network. I started doing a little more, like, I've always liked the idea of psychedelics. I find them interesting. I really didn't dabble in psychedelics when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the farther I've gone myself in psychedelics are like mushrooms, so psilocybin and cannabis. I'm a cannabis fan.
Mm-hmm.
But when I started looking into the fungi and this like human connection, how it's like a massive map. And then one of the largest fungi that's like the size of like 600 football fields that has it's crazy, has this interconnected, like it's human and it's alive and it has its own way of communicating. And I think that those things have not come to the forefront in Western culture yet. And I hope it does, because that is a very different way on how we connect with each other and also how the animal world and everything else connects.
Definitely.
My connection question for you is, we're talking about how and why now is the time that psychedelics and plant medicine are starting to come into the forefront of our pop culture and mainstream lives. And to Chrissy's point about this whole interconnected tissue between the mushrooms, between underground, I often wonder whether or not plants evolve. Plants are living beings, and if you've indulged in plant medicine in a psychedelic capacity, then there's an understanding that there's a spirit attached to it. Do you believe that it's not so much humans that are making plant medicine successful, like bringing it into the fore these days? Or do you think that this might be a spiritual evolution of the plant to kind of have to come more integrated into our lives?
Definitely. Yeah. There's a profound intelligence that in the West, at least, we have no real understanding of. And, you know, guys like Paul Stamets, and the work MAP's doing, like I said, and a number of others, Ram Dass, even, formerly known as Dr. Richard Alpert, and all this, you know, the studies and work he did with Timothy Leary. Love it or hate it, that was groundbreaking stuff, you know, to plant the seed of this idea that there was much more to these substances than simply getting high. These are spiritually evolving entities that we can tap into, keys to access deeper realm selves. You know, something that's interesting that's happening, I absolutely believe that there's a deep intelligence to these plants and that they are coming to the forefront, for lack of a better term, to rescue humanity. We are in a spiritual and emotional crisis. Look at America. It's fucking falling apart. You know, we're so disconnected. We're so in utter turmoil. We have no sense of self, no sense of who we are, you know, and here come these medicines. I mean, ayahuasca is becoming this almost mainstream thing. I mean, especially in California, you could go into Topanga Canyon and, you know, walk into somebody's house and they're probably getting ready to do an ayahuasca ceremony, you know, good or bad. I mean, I think you should find a shaman, a facilitator who has great respect for the medicine. And this isn't like an every Friday night type of deal either. I mean, these are very powerful substances that deserve respect, and they deserve to be treated as such. That being said, to round out your point, Chrissy, about psilocybin is one of my favorite plants to use. It's become, you know, really a profound teacher and healer for me in my life. It's very much occurred to me that humanity is in an emotional and spiritual crisis, and we're in dire need of help. And you can get years and years of therapy through a single dose of many of these things. and especially if that experience is accompanied by a facilitator, a shaman, someone who understands sort of the process of what's happening. This is what I was going to say. One of the issues with mainstream culture right now, in my opinion, when it comes to talking about psychedelics, is the conversation likes to veer into the visions, into the things that you see and the encounters with interdimensional beings and God knows what else. But really, psychedelics for me, what they're constantly doing, I'm a heavy meditator as well. I meditate every day. And to be honest with you, every psychedelic experience I've had has been like a state of deep meditation. And it's always just bringing us back to ourselves. And it's always just coming back to the truth of who we are, what we are, releasing us from pain, showing us the things that we hide from ourselves. And that is really the power of all of these things, whether it's ayahuasca and DMT or psilocybin, LSD, etc. It's all about constantly just bringing us back to ourselves. And the vehicle of that is sometimes super psychedelic and, cosmic and mystical and, these ineffable experiences that people are always talking about. But what it is getting to know yourself,
I agree. When you decided to leave the NFL and then you ended up getting into this realm, in spirituality, along with psychedelics, along with this own self path that you're creating and learning, like through ancestry and through all of it, did the sports community say anything to you about that? Did they look down at it? Did they frown upon it? Because typically, totally could be a stereotype. When you're looking at professional players, this might be changing now, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that I would imagine not all of them are embracing that. And they're not looking in that side of their life for guidance and understanding and a spiritual connection. Instead, some of them, not all, but some were still out, running around doing multiple things that are probably not really close to spirit. Let's just say that.
Yeah,
do you
of
find
course.
that they were like, what are you doing? And
That's-
really questioned your path and not being in sports too?
Yeah, I had a conversation last night where I was reminded of this, but pretty quickly after my NFL career, I just organically, because this is how my life works, I'm always just following the flow of the universe. Seldom when I'm trying to do anything does it work out. It's always like the universe says, this is where the next step is, Eb. So in that vein, I found myself in cannabis advocacy, talking about how cannabis had really benefited me throughout my football career as an alternative to opiates, even helping me erase opiates from my life. And I felt as though I came out of my career in better shape because of my cannabis use than had I not. And, I don't know if much of this was my own putting on myself, but I felt when I went into that and things happened that really empowered me in that truth. I learned about the federal government's patent on cannabinoids as neuroprotectants and antioxidants, patent 6,630,507 for anyone who's interested in that. I learned about the endocannabinoid system, and my whole experience was really crystallized as a player because I had always been a captain. I was always a team leader. I was the guy that coaches look to set the example for my teammates. So throughout my football career, I really kept my cannabis use very personal and private, because for anyone to find out that I was quote unquote like a stoner was horrifying to me, So when I really went down this path, I had a conversation with one of my friends, and I said to him, man, I don't know. I feel like maybe I've just alienated myself from that whole world. And he was like, yeah, you have. And it kind of hit me. And then this New York Post article came out where I'd done an interview and I talked about playing games after consuming cannabis. And the headline was literally with my face. I played stoned on the fucking front page of the New York Post.
Yeah.
I'm totally horrified, and this Twitter windstorm just kicks up. And, most of it was positive for the most part, but I was really horrified, because my thought immediately went to what happens when my high school coaches find out about this? And what happens when all these people who looked at me as this certain guy were now seeing the truth of who I was? It was really, I felt insanely vulnerable. I felt terrified. I was super scared. And all of that has really been rectified over the last few years, even as I've continued down the path and started speaking about psychedelics and how they've had this profound healing effect on me in my life, and talking about meditation and all sorts of wellness practices that I do. I've had old team doctors from the NFL reach out to me and introduce me to people because they say, Eb, I've been following you since you left here and I'm so proud of you and I'm so inspired, and I've stopped prescribing guys Vicodin because I see the damage it does to them, and you really seem to be the tip of the spear in this Cannabis for Athletes movement, and I want, and it was so relieving, to and then having conversations with all my old coaches, and they're like, yeah, dude, you're right. You're totally right. Cannabis saved me through my football career, but I could never talk about it. And then having ex-teammates call me up and say the same thing, like, dude, keep doing it, keep speaking the truth. So a lot of that was self-inflicted, which I think a lot of the time our fear mechanisms and things that we worry about, the anxiety we have, is self-inflicted. And some trolls on social media.
Always.
But beyond that, it's been very positive, and my experience of it has been validating and empowering me to continue speaking my truth. Because like you said, we're really stepping into this age now where people are starting to accept it and go, oh, maybe there's something here,
Yeah. With, we're talking a lot about psychedelics, obviously, and plant medicines. But what I'm also getting from this conversation is your devotion to a daily practice of meditation and just a general sense of wellness. What do you think, in your opinion, just anecdotally, what do you think is a effective psychedelic-esque kind of experience you can have without taking drugs? Like, what is there, like float tanks, or what is it that people can get into that maybe is like a good little step that they can dip their toe in, check it out, see what it's like without actually going into an ayahuasca ceremony?
I love that question. Such a good question. And there's many things. Breath work is a profound psychedelic experience. I've gotten to the point now, honestly, where every morning I wake up, I do some stretching, I do a breath work regimen, which started with my introduction to this guy, Wim Hof, who you guys and some of your listeners are probably familiar with. He's really, he's kind of the godfather of breath work in the West, because he brought in this idea that you can master your mind, master your body through the breath. So much of it has to do with Wim Hof. He uses a technique. He has sort of revolutionized, innovated an ancient technique used by Tibetan monks in the Himalayas called Tumo, which is this very fast, intense breathing. It's like in through the nose, full inhale, out through the mouth, full exhale. And I do that. I've gotten to such a point where I do that. I've done that, and I've become so consistent and disciplined with it that now, if I consume cannabis, I can only have a tiny bit because I'm already walking around so high. and it's this natural state of just really being at my highest level of consciousness that I'm sort of able to be at and be functional. And so breath work is a big one. There's all sorts of things you can do. Little disclaimer, there's an app I'm working with called Breathwork, Breath, BREATHWRK. It's the best app I've come across that has every type of breathwork practice you can imagine. It has the Wim Hof stuff. It has calming breaths. It has breaths for focus. It talks about why, what they do. It's got scientific stuff in there. It's mind blowing. Started by this 24-year-old kid who was suffering deeply from anxiety, couldn't get out of bed for months. And he met with his therapist, and the guy showed him this one breathing technique, and it just transformed his life. He's like, I gotta create something here. So he's a miraculous story. I highly recommend the app because it's a great introduction, and it's a great tool to tap into breath work. So breath work is really number one. Meditation is number two. I would have to say that, my foundation of coming to know myself and preparing myself for any psychedelic experience I've ever had started with meditation. And years ago, my brother, I have to credit my younger brother, Gus, he got into meditation pretty early, and he would come to me and he'd say, Eb, you should try meditating. I'd be like, fuck that, man. I don't have time for that, like so many of us do. And, pretty quickly after my NFL career, I found myself at complete rock bottom, was just really struggling with myself, with my marriage, and was in a pretty dire state. I'd completely broken down, and I was seeing this therapist, and she recommended meditation, and I just surrendered to it, and I started doing it. And the thing with meditation that I think is the most important thing to remember with meditation is that it's like going to the gym. I think a lot of people, myself included, you come to meditation and I thought to myself, I am going to get enlightened. I am going to clear myself of all these fucking thoughts running through my head. And the truth of the matter is, our brain is wired to just constantly be figuring things out, analyzing things, preparing us for the day ahead, etc. And there's no real rhyme or reason to it. But so what meditation does, and I use a pretty simple mindfulness practice where I'm just constantly focusing in on my breath, going in and out of my nose, and I just hone in on that. And thoughts come in, memories come in, things that are happening that day come in, and I start, going through the anxiety-laced rigmarole of figuring out what that's going to look like and how that's going to be. And, that's okay. That's part of the process. And I might get carried away on a train of thought for 2 or 3 minutes before I remember, oh shit, I'm meditating. So let me just bring my focus right back to my breath. And I might do that 1,000 times in 20 to 30 minutes. I usually meditate for about 30 minutes in the morning. And then I like to get like a 10-minute little add-on later in the day because it's nice to refresh. But it's been so powerful for me. And now I've been meditating for 4 years now every day. And my whole life has changed. Like I'm a different person than I was 4 years ago. I'm a different person than I was a year ago. And the meditation has transcended the practice and has really come into my life. I never would have been this clear and comprehensive and in the flow as I am right now if it wasn't for meditation. So meditation is the second thing. And then the last thing I'll say is fasting. I do intermittent fasting all the time. Fasting is a tremendous way when you give your body a break from having to digest food all the time. You give yourself an opportunity to digest all old shit, feelings, emotions, all the things that no longer serve you, that are holding you back from really what I like to call, and what Kirk inspired me to, is living in your highest greatness. and that's what it's all about for all of us. So those are the three things, non-substance wise, that will give you a profound psychedelic experience. And you hear all the spiritual gurus talk about it,
Turn on, tune in, and drop out.
Turn on, tune in, drop out
is the counterculture phrase, and it was popularized by Timothy Leary in 1966. He was considered by Nixon to be the most dangerous man in the world because he was advocating for the use of all different types of psychedelics within mainstream culture. But then Nixon signed that bill hard to pass psilocybin and all of those drugs. Pretty much war on drugs happened. And then after that, 30 years later down the road, we've never had any research done properly. And now we're starting to. But do you imagine if we had 30 years worth of research on psychedelics, where we would be now in the context of like consciousness, how to deal with depression, anxiety, like all these different things. And so everything they told us pretty much was a lie. And go figure, that's the war on drugs. A lot of bad things happen because of the war on drugs.
So many things happened in the 60s that really have defined our lives and introduced so many interesting concepts. I love that Timothy Leary was a professor. I love Ram Dass. I think it's really interesting that they went on this quest to go inwards to try and understand themselves. So instead of how in tradition we had gone towards religion to try and understand what the world is bigger than ourselves, but what Leary and Ram Dass and all of their compatriots did is they used psychedelics in order to go within themselves to find the divinity within them and express this revelation of life.
Well, right. And it really started because of that famous bicycle ride that happened as well. The one scientist. So Albert Hofmann was the first scientist to come across LSD and make LSD. They don't know how he ingested it. He either like touched his eye or did something weird, touched his mouth. So he ingested a little bit of LSD, and he was the first person in the world to have a trip. And so I believe him and his lab partner decided then after they tripped out in the lab that they would go take a bicycle ride home. And he went back to his house and it became one of the world's most famous bicycle rides ever, because every time when he got home, things were so vibrant. He was looking at himself from the ceiling. So he really started that. And then obviously what happened is, he looked at LSD very different and psychedelics very different compared to what others might think. And then later on, Nixon obviously passed it into legislation on the war on drugs. But what happened was that the CIA ended up getting involved in it, and they started actually putting it into the water. And there was other conversations about the government using LSD. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's actually talked about. And so when that happened, the government then took hold of it. And then later on, Nixon decided to pass the bill on war on drugs. So with that said, obviously people were fun-loving and loving each other. And I think something really great was happening and positive, and they wanted to squash that. So good job, Albert Hofmann, because obviously now if we would have, I've never taken LSD, let's be honest. I don't know. I'm not going to ask you if you have, Marie. You can talk about your drug use on this.
I haven't taken LSD. When I was 10, yet. I did pretend
that you were on LSD. But apparently Albert Hofmann was then later on an activist and decided that, using it for different things that are helping people rather than, obviously something's bad. But yeah, pretty cool. Amazing bicycle ride. That would have been fantastic.
You're like, I taste the colors.
I want to take a bicycle ride like that. It's so much fun.
Smell the sounds. I love the, I'm always fascinated.
All I hear in my head is like, hello, morning sunshine. That song. Like bikes, like just like rainbows and cartoons jumping out. And I'm like, am I in Toontown? Like,
yes,
exactly. Yes, I am.
You are.
That's going to be my bicycle ride if I ever do LSD.
I had to look up about the CIA dosing Americans accidentally with LSD, and this is wild.
It's true. I know it's true. Most people be like, "That's a conspiracy theory." It's like, no. It's not. It was put into the water.
I love this.
Okay. No joke.
10 scientists come from the CIA, gathered in a cabin in Maryland for their semi-annual review and conference in November 1953. On day 2, a bottle of Cointreau, spiked with LSD, appeared. Oh, where did you come from? After it was emptied, Sidney Gottlieb, a CIA program director, informed his colleagues that they were in for a wild ride. And then it goes on from there. According to the 76 report, they noticed nothing strange about fellow scientist Frank Olson before the dosing. That night, he had been chatty and boisterous. But the next day, Olson appeared to be agitated, then depressed. Later that month, he committed suicide, falling 10 stories from a hotel in Washington, D.C. I don't think
that's probably not from the LSD. That's probably from the government pushing him.
I love it's like when you being on a show with somebody who has
mild anarchist,
mild anarchist, and
I should say a positive anarchist. I'm not going and burning bridges and stuff.
No, it's like a recreational anarchist. Like
how do you be a recreational anarchist? No, I believe in things like, for example, they always say if you're fishing in an area that you shouldn't be fishing. You know, obviously I don't believe in overfishing, but the idea is that you're doing something that the man tells you not to do, and you decide to do it anyway.
Okay. I still
anarchist.
Considering you're fighting recreational anarchists and then you described fishing. So
I guess a good point. It's a good point. But I'm not running around and, screaming, profanities at the government. And
no.
I do listen to the government. I just don't agree with everything that they're telling us, because obviously during times like this in the 60s, you were putting LSD in the water and trying it out on humans without telling us. That's not appropriate, government. And then you sign bills like Nixon on the war on drugs, when 30 years later we could be at a very far place, but instead you decide not to. So I don't always agree with everything the government tells me. Anyway,
but I love how it's just like and rant. We got on that because you were like, no, he did not commit suicide. He potentially was pushed out of the window because the government wants to create a scenario in which LSD should be a banned substance so that they control it for whatever reason, because they don't want people.
Do that.
I mean, he did commit suicide. We just don't know if the government pushed him. Right. So that is still up for debate. So if anybody has information, we would love to hear it. So if we skip back in time, because usually there's a little bit of history lesson. The first use of psychedelics happened thousands upon thousands.
Good point. It's not just the 60s. It was, yes, that's a very good point.
The human race has been using psychedelics before 5000 BCE.
Right.
There's frescoes of shamans holding mushrooms. That was in Algeria, and that was in 5000 BC. So the little mushroom shaman had his happy little
They've been used all over the world. Brazil, Peru, so many countries have used psychedelics in ritual ceremonies and for healing purposes, not recreational. It was mainly used for any type of ceremony that they would do. Yeah. So I agree. This whole concept of recreational drugs really stemmed that maybe from the counterculture movement. Hippies did pick it up, but before then it was not a fun drug in quotation marks.
I feel like when we started going into recreational use of drugs, it was in a time where we're like, we need to have some sort of escapism because life sucks. But back in the day, whenever they're doing it, I mean, obviously nobody really knows. They're using it for spiritual purposes, likely. Right. But it's interesting because that's a time where they had a perspective that the sense of wellness was just energy and your powers within and spiritual things. So it was a whole connection of mind, body, and spirit. That even though we're talking about people who lived 5,000 years ago, but it's still kind of crazy to think we got so separated from that to say that all of these psychedelics and magic mushrooms, psilocybin, that's one of the earliest ones. That's our little mushroom shaman.
But there's so many different types of psychedelics that are out there that we don't even know. There's probably even more that we've never really come across.
Oh, did you know morning glory seeds are also psychedelic? That's one of them. Psilocybin, we know magic mushrooms, obviously ecstasy, aka Molly, aka MDMA, mescaline or peyote. The thing is that we as humans, for whatever reason, have migrated or found a way to these drugs, to these plant medicines, and we use them. And more people are using it for not just ceremonial purposes, but also to help control or manage mental health issues that they have. A lot of people are starting to microdose MDMA because they feel like it helps them manage their depression. There's people who are microdosing psilocybin or magic mushrooms because they feel like that's helping them control their mood and giving them a better sense of life. I don't microdose. I've never done shrooms, surprisingly. But I think there's this thing where our connection with psychedelics, even though Nixon comes in and says, this is illegal, there's still a really strong spiritual connection to these medicines. And we as humans keep gravitating back. We got away from them in the 80s. And I guess everybody was doing coke in the 80s. That was like the cool drug. But look what happened. We got into the 90s and it was all about ecstasy. And then we go into the 2000s and weed is being legalized. And then we're going into the 2020s and potentially psilocybin is being legalized. And people are going on trips, vacations for their ayahuasca. And
well, I think you're going into a fair amount of syncs right now.
There's a smattering.
Yeah, but your first one, I would say, like the medical side, I would say is one of our first syncs because, again, 30 years of not having any research done on psychedelics and now us starting to finally play with them and play, in them. And I shouldn't say that, like a lot of psychotherapists in the 50s would use psychedelics and then that was kiboshed after obviously we got into the war on drugs, no more, but it was played around with a little bit in therapy. But now we're getting, for example, athletes. We're getting former athletes that are using psychedelics now because of massive brain injuries and trauma. So one of the first ones is former NHL player Daniel Carcillo. How do you say that? Carcillo?
Anybody who wants to correct us, feel free to reach out on social, on Twitter at Alt.Pop.Repeat. Just let us know how to pronounce these words that we have difficulty with.
Right. So Daniel Carcillo described on HBO's Real Sports with Brian Gumbel that he was planning on killing himself. And then after he actually found relief in psychedelics. On this segment, he's not the only person doing the show. Brian Gumbel actually talks to a fair amount of other former athletes that now are using psychedelics to help them. But they've said that psilocybin has recently shown benefits in patients with multiple different mental health issues, PTSD, depression. And then apparently an Australian hospital, Melbourne Hospital, is treating terminally ill patients with high doses of psilocybin in an attempt to damper anxiety as they come to, life comes to an end. So there's multiple reasons outside of just mental health. There's many ways that psychedelics can help people. The next thing you did say, though, unless you want to say something about medicinal.
Well, medicinal, I think is interesting because you were mentioning how in Melbourne they're using it to treat people for their part of their end of life care. One of the most famous people that I think, earlier famous people that were using psychedelics is Aldous Huxley.
Who's Aldous Huxley?
He wrote Brave New World.
Oh,
he wrote
right. I've never read Brave New World.
Really?
No, I'm a 1984 girl. Yeah, I'm a George Orwell girl. I haven't gone down that road yet. I'm going to pick that up now.
He also wrote Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell, which are two short works that are detailing the effects of psychedelics on the unconscious. He first experimented with mescaline in 1953. He took LSD in 1955. His experiments with psychedelics is what inspired him to write The Island. And, if we're going on to the day that he died on the exact same day that President John F. Kennedy died. Really? As he was on his way out on his deathbed, he asked his wife to inject him with 100 micrograms of LSD, which is equal to 1 tab. And that's kind of like he used psychedelic medicine to transition into death.
Wow.
Which is kind of like the characters in his final novel. Like he wrote about it.
Too, we don't really know this. I'm not sure if it's been proven, but we have DMT in the middle of our brain. And that when we die, it releases DMT and then it's easier, obviously, on the body And that's why people have like blissful experiences and other things. And I'm not going to say it's an afterlife experience, but there are things related. So can you imagine? He was doing LSD and DMT. I'm like, whoa, that would have been a trip.
on his way out.
He might not have known that at that time too. So that would have been an Alice in Wonderland trip right there.
It's so there we have like in the 20th century, some of the most famous novels written by a fantastically famous author introduced people to the idea of psychedelics long before the 60s. And he used it as a part of his transition into death, which is like, crazy.
Smart. The other sync that you brought up, though, was travel. Tons of tourists now that are going on these psychedelic experiences, and they're traveling around the world, and they're not using it recreationally. They're using it for healing purposes, and they're happening all over the world in all different countries, in Peru, lots of different countries in South America. But the question is now that, are they doing it right? Is this psychedelic travel really the right way to go? Because unfortunately, you're getting these people that are going on these trips, trips in quotation mark, but they're not going to the right places, and it's becoming commercialized. So unfortunately, when it's becoming commercialized, you're not really getting maybe a shaman. You're getting the guy, in the back alley that says he's a shaman and doing it. So that's scary, because if you don't do ayahuasca or some of these psychedelics properly, you can die, and people have died. And again, I think that is another misconception from psychedelics. Obviously, a lot of people don't die from it, but you can. If you're not doing it properly or not respecting the plant properly, then you can. And there has been cases that people have died in Peru and other countries.
I tend to agree. I think people are gravitating towards this, and I can't help but constantly just ask, why now? Why are they so into it now?
Well, one thing I would say is because the use of the internet and having more information about it, and the psychedelics are a little bit more welcomed in mainstream now and talk about it. And they've been embedded throughout our mainstream culture for a while, but now it's become a little bit more acceptable to talk about it. And people now are understanding and looking up these plants, because how many times have your parents or somebody's parents have done done peyote or other things during the 60s, the psychedelic 60s. So I would imagine that those conversations we're still having, and now we're able to look them up and understand them a little bit more. I do have a clip though that I want to pop in, and this is one of my favorite ones, is with Chelsea Handler.
Oh, when she does ayahuasca?
Yeah, and she does, and her show Chelsea does. And she talks about the experience that she had on the late night show with Stephen Colbert.
So they put this brew in, and they brew this tea with these leaves.
What is ayahuasca?
It's just like it's like a tree root. It's got DMT in it, and you vomit.
Sign me up.
And you purge. They call it purging, and you purge, and then you have all these hallucinations about your childhood. It's very, very vivid imagery.
And is that good? I mean, did you get something from it?
Yeah, I had forgotten that I loved my sister.
All right.
So I told her right away. I was like, hey, girl, love you again.
And the one thing I love about Chelsea Handler is that she's so well respected in Hollywood and within the mainstream culture that she can make humor in light of psychedelics, but also explain how it's affected her life and how it's helped change her life. To me, she's one of the best syncs for this, because she's the first time that a mainstream celebrity has done ayahuasca on camera that I know of.
But it's interesting watching Chelsea have the conversation with Stephen Colbert about it, because it's like, I think it's interesting even mentioning her purging and going through it. It's pretty profound, but
it is. And you're right, on Stephen Colbert. So you have a mainstream celebrity that's already done it on TV. I believe it was on Netflix. And then millions of people watching that. And then now you go to do your promo, and the one clip you decide to talk about and the one experiences, it could have been anything. She did multiple things in Chelsea Does, but you decide to talk about ayahuasca in your experience. And so on a massive late night talk show, and a respected one at that. So right there is like a sync, and it's sync on its own. So it's making waves.
It's making waves. And again, like, I think we have to talk about also, like, when you're doing tourism with psychedelics, quite often people are thinking about going to indigenous communities in South America, and many of these countries are struggling because they don't have the same amount of wealth. And so an opportunity to have tourist dollars, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to generate wealth. However, sometimes it's at the sacrifice of resources. And that is something that I think we have to take a responsibility from in the Western perspective, is that we are of the generation that collects experiences over material possessions. That's what, millennials do. That's a part of who we are and what's in our psyche. So to travel around the world and do all of these psychedelic experiences is incredible. However, you have to understand that that footprint has an impact. And we have to be mindful of the resources that we're using in order to experience these wonderful trips.
Right. It's very much a privilege to do it. So we have to respect it.
Yeah, and would not abuse it. Ayahuasca is only legal in Peru. That's it. And it's a part of a spiritual ceremony. So you're not allowed to take it unsupervised, but it's only legal in
I didn't know
Peru.
that.
Yeah. But we also have to think that, we talked about Albert Hoffman, who was the gentleman who discovered LSD.
Yeah.
You can go and do an LSD trip in Switzerland.
Yeah. You don't have to go to Peru.
No, like the world of psychedelics is vast. And the opportunities to have experiences with it are equally as plentiful. So why don't you go to Switzerland, go to Basel, go to the birthplace of hallucinogenic science, just dive into it and look at all of what the realms have to offer.
But you make a really good point in the interview. There's other ways to have a psychedelic experience without ingesting something. You can do it through meditation. You can do it through breathing. You can do it through light exercises. So I think that's really important for people to know that if you want to have a psychedelic experience that you feel is spiritual in some form, maybe healing, or just have that experience, you don't have to go and get high through the use of drugs. Yeah,
it's true. And it's like, I have friends right now that are really into Kundalini yoga. You were doing Kundalini for a while.
Yeah.
Breath of fire, that rapid breathing technique can produce a hallucinogenic effect after a while.
Totally.
But there's like lots of things that you can do.
I'm going to move into another sync.
Do it.
Is psychedelic rock music. How the heck can we not talk about music? Because obviously psychedelics and music go hand in hand. We had Pink Floyd. The Beatles were one of them. I actually looked it up and some people said the Beach Boys were psychedelic. I thought that was interesting. I don't know if I agree with that or not, but maybe. But again, Pink Floyd for sure, one of the favorite bands. And then obviously the Beatles moved into a psychedelic moment. So now we're seeing psychedelic rock music in all different genres. One that makes a lot of sense and goes hand in hand with music festivals is the dance EDM music culture. Psychedelics and dance music are so common. Chance the Rapper said that he stated in his debut mixtape, and he quoted, "Rap just made me anxious and acid made me crazy." So he's saying it obviously publicly that he's using psychedelics. And then Father John Mystery apparently trip balls at a Taylor Swift concert. You're seeing it a lot now in modern music, not just psychedelic rock.
Okay, there is a culture around Fish, the band. Do people not trip balls at Fish concerts? Like they consider it to be a, let's look it up. Yeah, let's talk to the Google man.
Hey Siri. No, right. When I go to a big Fish concert, should I do drugs?
A big Fish concert. Is that probably different? Fish, right. Phis.
Oh, Big Fish. Right. I don't know the band very well.
I have friends that are really big into Fish. I don't know why. I know nothing about them. But when people go to a Fish concert, they have an out of body
psychedelic music though?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Phish. People definitely do take psychedelics. And when they go to the shows, they go because they have a psychedelic experience.
It's becoming so mainstream now within music, within all different podcasting, we have it as well. There is in Joe Rogan, you get a mycologist, Paul Stamets, who is like the world leader on psilocybin, and he clocked in 5 million views on Joe Rogan. That's how sought after he was, and people were requesting him on Joe Rogan. Like it's everywhere now.
It's everywhere.
If we like it or not, it's in the mainstream and it's pumping in there hard. So I wonder where it's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years, where we'll see people using psychedelics more in all different varieties.
I think that people are going to be working towards more plant medicines. And I think as we're starting to take mental health more seriously, we are going to start looking at alternative, more natural ways to do it. Because if there is merit to microdosing psilocybin or any of these other psychedelics that will have a positive effect on people's mental health, then yeah, they're going to do it. They're going to want to try it. So what psychedelics has brought to us, I mean, taking a look at the 20th century, you have Jean-Paul Sartre, you have Aldous Huxley, you have all sorts of famous men and women redefining how we think about sci-fi and fantasy and spirituality and
how we see each other,
how we see each other.
Connection. You know, they say psychedelics really create connections with people.
Yeah. So all of it is from the effects of psychedelics.
So with that said, Marie, where can people go check us out?
Well, it would be a delight to chat with people about our episode on psychedelics anywhere online. Come and talk to us on Twitter, Alt.Pop.Repeat. I mean, it's bopping these days. Thanks to Elle, she's going gangbusters on adding in her tweets. And I think she's doing a great job of it. You can join us on Instagram, again, Alt.Pop.Repeat.
Yep.
Our website, Alt.Pop.Repeat.com. If you want to give us money, you can go to our Patreon.
Yes, please.
Patreon.com/Alt.Pop.Repeat.
Yep. And then check us out on Dash Radio every Friday and Saturday. And obviously go to all streaming platforms, Spotify, iTunes, and listen to us there as well. You can hear older shows, new shows, pictures, all those fun things.
Words, pictures, experiences, sounds.
Yeah. Life,
images, everything coming together in a Woodstock of ideas.
Yeah. So don't forget, tune on, tune in, and drop
out.